All right. Let's jump into it today. We're going deep on something that I bet everyone's thought about, if you've ever hired someone or managed someone.
Or even just worked with millennials.
Yeah. What do they actually want in a job?
Yeah.
We've all heard all the stereotypes, right? Like,
Oh, so many.
but are they really true?
Well, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We've got some academic research, and it focuses specifically on French gendarmes entering the workforce.
Ooh la la.
And spoiler alert, their preferences are way more nuanced than you might think.
Okay, so juicy. Before we get into like all the really interesting details, though, what kind of research are we actually talking about here?
So they use this method called conjoint analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what that is it helps researchers figure out what people really prioritize when you make them choose between different job features. So imagine like you have to pick between a job with a higher salary,
Yeah.
but it's a really long commute, or
Yeah.
or a job with a shorter commute but less pay, right?
Yeah.
Conjoint analysis kind of decodes those decisions
Yeah.
and uncovers what people's hidden preferences are.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. So what did this conjoint analysis tell us about our French Gen Y friends?
So, get this. Their top priorities were job security. Specifically, they wanted permanent contracts
Okay.
and a relaxed work atmosphere.
Wait, really? I always thought Gen Y, like the stereotype is they're all about like exciting jobs and quick promotions and like,
Yeah.
making a difference really fast.
Right.
This seems a lot more, I don't know.
Traditional?
Yeah, a lot more traditional.
No, and that's where I think things get really interesting, right? So remember, these are French millennials,
Right.
and they came of age during a time where there was a lot of economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
So for them, job security wasn't just like a nice to have, it was a big deal. It was like a really important thing.
Yeah, like a safety net.
Yeah,
Yeah, in a shaky world.
exactly.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what about the relaxed atmosphere? I thought millennials were all about collaboration and like
Ping pong table.
ping pong tables, like that kind of work environment.
Yeah, well, they are, right. They do want that supportive and collaborative environment.
Right.
But that actually ties directly into wanting a relaxed atmosphere.
Okay, I see the connection.
Mhm.
It's not just about being chill, but about feeling like you're part of a team.
Exactly.
So I've got job security and like a positive work environment. What other things did this study find?
Okay, so another thing they looked at was a bunch of other job attributes. And interestingly enough, distance from home was a huge factor,
Hmm.
like a huge factor. It actually outranked salary
Wow.
and career advancement opportunities.
Yeah, I can see that, especially when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
Like, who wants to spend hours in traffic? No,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yeah, it really just shows you how much they care about work-life balance.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, speaking of salary, where did that fall on the list?
So it was definitely important,
Oh, okay.
but it wasn't like the be-all, end-all.
So, not all about the money then.
No, not necessarily.
Interesting. Okay. What about things like career advancement opportunities
Right.
and like the type of work itself?
Yeah, so career advancement was important,
Mhm.
which is pretty standard for any generation.
Right.
But what was interesting is the type of work, whether it involved a lot of variety
Okay.
or more like routine tasks, wasn't a major deciding factor.
Really?
Huh.
You'd think that, Gen Y would be all about those stimulating jobs where it's constantly changing and,
Right.
yeah, constantly new.
It definitely challenges that assumption, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah.
Yeah.
What about working hours?
Yeah.
Was there a preference for like the 9 to 5
Yeah.
or something more flexible?
Yeah, so they definitely preferred regular working hours,
Okay.
which again reinforces that desire for work-life balance.
Makes sense. We all need time to recharge and unplug,
Exactly.
no matter what generation we're part of.
Exactly.
Um, Anything else that stood out to you in this research?
Yeah, a couple other things. So company reputation mattered,
Okay.
but not as much as some of those other factors we talked about.
Okay.
And managerial status. So whether a job was a management position or not was actually the least important thing for this group.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like stability, positive work environment, reasonable commute.
Yeah.
Those are like the real winners here
Yeah.
for our French millennials.
Absolutely. But here's where things get even more interesting.
Ooh, I love a good plot twist. What is it?
So remember how we were talking about all those stereotypes about what Gen Y wants?
Right.
Well, this research actually found that Gen Y is not a homogenous group at all.
Okay.
They actually identified 4 distinct classes of Gen Y job seekers,
Interesting.
each with their own unique set of priorities.
Wait, so we can't just lump all millennials together.
Yeah.
Tell me more about these 4 classes.
Okay, so first we've got the security seekers.
Okay.
As the name suggests, they are all about job security, stable working hours.
Okay.
They want predictability. They want to know what's coming next.
So they really value stability,
Yeah.
knowing what to expect,
Yeah.
which makes sense in a world that feels so uncertain these days.
Exactly.
Who else is in the mix?
All right. Then you've got the career-minded folks.
Okay.
These are kind of like your classic go-getters.
Mm-hmm.
They are ambitious, drawn to high salaries,
Right.
opportunities for advancement, and they're more likely to be attracted to, prestigious organizations and companies.
Okay, so those are the folks who are gunning for the corner office.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the other two?
Okay, so we've also got the balance seekers.
Okay.
And you guessed it, they are all about work-life harmony.
Hmm.
They want that relaxed work environment, manageable commute,
Yeah.
regular hours, and just a good mix of tasks to keep things interesting.
They sound like they have their priorities straight.
Yeah.
Work-life balance is so important no matter what stage of your career you're in. All right, last group. Who are they?
So this is where it gets really interesting. This is the group they called easygoing, and they're kind of the outliers.
Easygoing. I like the sound of that. What makes them so different, though?
So unlike the other groups, the easygoing folks actually value things that other millennials might see as a negative.
Interesting.
Like they're okay working for a lesser-known company, having a non-management role, and even engaging in more routine tasks.
Whoa, that really flicks the script.
Yeah.
We're always told that millennials want, like, constant stimulation and leadership opportunities.
Yeah.
But this group seems perfectly content with a much more low-key approach.
Totally. And it just goes to show you why you can't make these broad generalizations about entire generations.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. So if we can't just lump all millennials into one big category, how do we make sense of these different classes?
Right.
What's the takeaway here?
Well, it comes down to understanding that a label like Gen Y is just too broad.
Okay.
It's like assuming everyone born in the same decade must have the same personality and career goals.
It's just not realistic. People are individuals, not walking stereotypes. So where do we go from here? What does all of this mean for the people who work with millennials, whether they're hiring, managing, mentoring them?
Yeah, the key is to really recognize and embrace that diversity within Gen Y.
Okay.
So instead of trying to appeal to this like mythical average millennial, we need to tailor our approaches to those specific segments.
So it's like speaking different languages. You need to understand the nuances of each group to really connect with them.
Exactly. And that's where this research becomes really valuable.
Okay, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, but also kind of excited by all this information. Can we pause here for a second and let all this sink in for our listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah. Take a minute, process it all, because I think understanding these nuances can really change the game when it comes to attracting and managing talent.
Totally. Okay, so what does all of this actually mean for you, dear listener? If you are Gen Y yourself, like think about which of these four classes really speaks to you, your own values and goals. What are your non-negotiables in a job?
And if you're working with Gen Yers already, whether you're a manager or a mentor or even just a colleague, how can you use this knowledge to build a more inclusive and supportive work environment?
Yeah, it's about moving past those like tired stereotypes and recognizing that each person brings their own unique motivations to the table.
Right.
I've definitely learned that lesson the hard way.
Oh, tell me more.
So I used to manage a team of Gen Yers.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell into that trap of thinking that they all thrived on like constant feedback and public recognition.
Right.
But it turns out one of my team members was super introverted
Yeah.
and really valued receiving that feedback privately in a one-on-one setting.
That's a great example of how even when you have good intentions, things can backfire if you don't take the time to understand people's individual needs.
Totally.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I had another team member who was incredibly ambitious, always eager for a new challenge. So I made sure to give her tons of opportunities for growth and development,
Right.
which really boosted her motivation.
Yeah, that's what personalized leadership is all about, right?
Yeah.
By recognizing and responding to those individual differences, we can create a much more empowering and supportive work environment.
Totally, yeah. So it's all about customization, both in how we recruit people
Right.
and how we manage people.
Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work, whether we're talking about Gen Y or, frankly, any other generation.
Yeah, all of this is making me think about my own career path. And I definitely see parts of myself in a couple of those Gen Y classes.
Oh, interesting. Which ones resonate most with you?
Well, I relate to the security seekers because, having a stable job, especially these days, is important to me.
Right.
But I also see myself in the balance seekers because I really value having that time and space for my personal life,
Mm.
outside of work.
It's interesting how those classes aren't mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us probably identify with aspects of several of them.
Right. And that's why it's so important to move away from these like rigid generational boxes that
Yeah.
people try to put us in and just recognize that human motivation is complex.
Right.
Okay, I'm feeling a lot less overwhelmed and a lot more empowered by all of this. Like we've been given a secret decoder ring for
Yeah.
understanding Gen Y.
I love that analogy. And the best part is, I think this knowledge isn't limited to Gen Y, right?
Right.
The idea of recognizing individual differences and tailoring your approach, I mean, that applies across the board.
So it's not about creating separate strategies for each generation, but just
Yeah.
adopting a more holistic and individualized approach
Exactly.
to working with people in general.
It's about embracing that beautiful complexity of human motivation.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's one final thought I want to leave our listeners with.
Mm.
This whole deep dive has been focused on job preferences.
Mm.
But what about like the broader cultural and societal influences that shape how Gen Y views work and life in general?
That's a great point. We talked about the economic context in France,
Right.
but there are so many other factors at play, like
Yeah,
the rise of social media, the gig economy, and even this growing emphasis on mental health and well-being.
totally. Those trends have had a huge impact on Gen Y, and they're only going to become more important in the years to come. Like, it makes me wonder how those trends are going to continue to shape the workplace, not just for Gen Y, but for all of us.
Those are great questions, and it just goes to show you there's always more to learn and explore.
Yeah, I'm already feeling inspired to do another deep dive on some of these like broader societal trends and how they're influencing the future of work.
I am in. That sounds fascinating. But for now, we'll have to leave our listeners with those thought-provoking questions.
It's a perfect note to end on because it really encourages our listeners to stay curious and keep challenging those assumptions. Speaking of which, we're going to have to wrap up this part of our deep dive here.
Okay.
But don't worry, we'll be back with the final part right after this quick break.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about all those big cultural trends and how they're changing how we think about work.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you really start to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, how has social media changed what people expect from their jobs?
Mm-hmm.
Or how does the whole gig economy fit into this?
Right. And what about that growing focus on mental health?
Yeah,
It seems like work-life balance isn't just a perk anymore.
right.
It's a necessity.
It really is. I think people are prioritizing their well-being way more than ever before,
Yeah.
and that's definitely having an impact on workplaces.
Yeah, for sure. I've even noticed it in my own life.
Yeah.
I'm so much more aware of burnout now
Yeah.
than I was even just a few years ago. And I'm way more intentional about setting boundaries between work and my personal life.
Yeah, and I think that's a really positive shift, don't you?
It's like people are realizing that their worth isn't tied to how productive they are.
Right, exactly. And hopefully that leads to more companies actually prioritizing employee well-being
Yeah.
and creating healthier work environments.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, it's really in everyone's best interest, isn't it? Happy employees are more engaged and more productive.
For sure, totally.
Mhm.
This whole conversation has made me realize just how much the world of work is changing
Yeah,
and how important it is to just stay adaptable and keep learning.
absolutely. The old ways of doing things just don't work anymore. We have to be open to new ideas and new approaches if we want to keep up and thrive.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest thing is that understanding is key. Whether you're Gen Y and you're navigating your career or you're working with Gen Years,
Yeah.
taking the time to really understand those individual motivations and preferences, that can make all the difference.
Yeah, it's about going deeper than those surface level stereotypes, right?
Exactly.
Like really seeing the person
Mhm.
behind the label.
Yeah, because we're all individuals. We all have our own unique needs and aspirations.
So well said. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. So to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope it's given you some things to think about and some new insights into the world of work.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And remember, there's always more to learn. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that matters to you. Until then, stay curious and keep asking those tough questions.
See you next time.
Bye for now.